model view model is it's an architectural pattern. So, and it is mainly, we can apply it wherever we have some user interface to show, right? For example, if it is a web application, ASP.NET, or currently Silverlight or WPF applications. So for this particular pattern, it means like we need to have a UI. So let's move on. The agenda for today's talk is to understand what the MVVM is, and then we'll take a look inside the MVVM pattern, and we'll see what are the participants or players that plays an active role inside the MVVM. And then we'll be discussing the data binding. Data binding is the key behind this MVVM framework. And after that, we'll be talking about how to implement that MVVM pattern in Delphi. And for this particular approach, I have designed a small framework that's for MVVM, and we'll be having a look at that framework, and then some appreciations and criticisms about this MVVM pattern. So yeah, let's move ahead. So what is MVVM? As I mentioned in the beginning, it's an architectural pattern, and this pattern is there is a guy in Microsoft. This is John Gossman. This is the guy behind this pattern. It comes from the Microsoft, which is actually based on a pattern from Martin Fowler. There is a pattern called presentation model. So MVVM is almost similar to the presentation model pattern that's from Martin Fowler. Okay. When we compare this MVVM with presentation model, right, both of these patterns actually focusing on the abstraction of the user interface. Like whatever application we see, if there is some way we can interact with that application, of course that's the UI. Maybe we interact with browser, or we use say if it is a desktop application, we have the Windows. That's how we interact with the application, right? So the idea of both of these pattern is to take the abstract out the user interface part from the application and design it in such a way that we don't mix the things together. Like if you take example of any application, for example, let's say if it is a C# or Delphi, we know that in Delphi, when we create application, there is a form where we put our controls, just drag and drop, and to display data from some of the things, like to display customer data, we'll have some tables that's storing the customer information. So we need some sort of mechanism to display those data from the customer table and bring those stuff into the user screen. And when we do these things, we need to write some sort of code, and generally the tendency is to put those code in the file, the same file where we actually dropped the user controls. That's the place where we put simple logics like when the button should be enabled, or like from where the table should be, from where we should be populating the data, that sort of things. So here what we are actually doing, we are mixing two things actually. One is the user interface, and the other thing is the logic, or it may be presentation logic. And the idea behind this presentation model pattern and MVVM pattern is to keep the things separate. And up to this part, this MVVM and PM presentation model pattern have the same goal, but there is different way after this particular point. MVVM uses some different technologies. It uses live binding stuffs, especially to do this abstraction, whereas the presentation model uses a different approach. Okay, so we can say that this MVVM is a specialized version. It's not new thing. It's a very specialized version of presentation model. And when we talk about MVVM, again, this concept is not a new. It just it goes back to the small talk world. So there is nothing new. After many years, the NASA already tried this thing, and that's the approach they are following. So there is nothing new. We already discussed like it's more of a UI abstraction that that MVVM is focusing on. Now, if we take a look inside what the MVVM, right? Like what are the parts that make up the MVVM pattern? Then, if we take a simple example, let's take simple example like we have a very small simple application which displays order information for a customer. Presumably, we can think of there will be some screen where we'll be showing the order information. There will be some table from where the data is coming. Okay, and there will be some code somewhere in the application that's binding the stuff together, like pulling the data from the table and showing it to the screen. Okay, so we already have a model here actually, right? And if we switch the same application to say object-oriented programming thing, then we'll have a class that represents a customer that will have fields like first name, last name, or customer's credit balance, blah blah, right? So this particular class, like the customer or order, we can say that's our model. The class which actually holds the state of our data, that's our model. And in some of the application, we also tend to mix some domain logic also inside the model. You can also say it's a domain model or a business model. Okay, but when we talk in terms of MVVM, the model means all those data that we need to display to the user. It's just a data. Okay. The other key player is a view. Again, it's very simple to understand what is a view. View is a simple thing, like whatever user can see and interact with, that's the view. And but with MVVM, the concept of view is slightly different. Like for a Delphi programmer, when we talk about view, it's the DFM file, the form file where we put our controls, and there is associated file, pass file, where we write our code. But in terms of MVVM, they believe that no code should be there in the associated file. If we take the example of C# or ASP.NET, in ASP.NET there is a web page, there's a separate entity, and there is associated .cs file, right? So when we talk about MVVM, view is totally different. The associated code behind file is kept different. Okay, and this is very important to understand the concept of view, especially for the MVVM. We should not try to write or keep it as minimal as possible the code inside the view. So view just should represent only user interface elements, only UX stuff. And the new guy, view model. Yeah, so we already know what is model, we already know what is view. View model is, I think we also know what is a view model. So let me just explain. It is the middleman who is responsible for fetching the data from those customer classes or order classes and do whatever it needs to do to show that data to the view. And whatever it takes, like pulling the data, making the connection to the view, or passing notifications. Like for instance, say if we are capturing an order, right? And if we need to save an order, we need to have some items to place the order, right? And the view model can put those kind of logic inside it that okay, if we have some items, then only user can save the data. So like that sort of validation, those all stuff can go inside the view model. And the other very important thing is interaction. Like once we have this model, view, and view model, the interaction among these three is very important. Like the idea behind MVVM is to keep the things separate. So interaction matters a lot. The model should be totally independent. It should have no idea about the view or view model. It's a completely different isolated entity. It just works on its own. When we talk about view, again we discuss like the purpose of MVVM is to abstract out the view. Okay, so again no code, no business logic should go inside the view. It should just represent only user elements. And the purpose behind this kind of abstraction is like nowadays we see that the same application is also developed in say one platform. For example, it may be a desktop application, or the same application may have its iPad version. Its same application may have its cell phone version. Okay, but the logic behind all this stuff is same. What changes is just the display, right? So this is one of the best candidate where MVVM plays a very vital role, because you don't have to duplicate the code, only view changes and it's done. So for interaction, the model should not know about anything. The view again also knows nothing about the presence of a model and view model. It just knows this, okay, there will be some data that's coming from somewhere. It doesn't have to bother from where it's coming. It just need to show the data. That's it is. Okay. Yeah. So here is the structure. Like if you see here, the first first player is a view that I have shown yellow marker that talks with the view model, but it actually in actual implementation it will not know anything about it. And this talking, the communication, the way it talks with the view model is through binding. So there will be no coupling or kind of references where we will be directly using the view model. And the interaction from view to view model. Here it means that view knows what will be the view, what will be the model, because it's really necessary, right? It needs to know from where the data is coming, what are the data, and how those data needs to be shown to the user. For example, I may have a class like where we have first name, last name. That's the information what we have in our say class, and the way we want to show is like first name and last name with some title added, like full name. Okay, so here we need to combine the things like first name, then we'll add last name, and then we will add appropriate title as a prefix. So that sort of mixing view model can take care, right? So view model has to have the idea of what the model it will be transforming. Okay, and you will also see a dotted line from a model to view model. Earlier I mentioned that there will not be any communication from a model to view, but here we have a dotted line. So it's not a direct communication. There will be some mechanisms like say a model is changed because of some other factors. In application we can have multiple screens, and the object which we are looking at, for example a customer, it may be updated from behind the scenes by some other trigger, or in an enterprise application the data is constantly changing by some other the one user is working from that place, other user is working from here, so data can trigger from any place. So model can get updated behind the scenes, and if you want a mechanism where our view can also reflect those changes, then we need some sort of communication, but it's again not a direct communication. This communication happens with the things like notifications or some sort of messaging systems. Yeah. So if break the things like what things should come or where should it actually go. So here, if you talk in terms of Delphi, all the UI elements, for instance, whether it's edit boxes, grades, or buttons, etc., those all sort of things are view. When you talk about view model, again some logic like how we'll be displaying those data in the view, and enabling, disabling of controls. Those all logic goes inside the view model. Some use validations also, and data transformation. I already talked about the data transformation, like we have first name and last name, want to combine it and show it differently, right? So that sort of things. And when we talk about model, things like data objects, some data processing related stuff, some data access, validation, etc. the core business part will go to the model things. So there are clearly three separated entities, and the communication is what explained here. And if we go and take a look inside some of the more complex application, of course there will be more things like there will be some service layer, there can be some security layer, there can be some altogether different business logic layer, but still there will be a model. Okay, so in a complete application, it's not necessary you can just have MVVM. There will be of course some other players, okay, and those can also interact with this MVVM, but we'll keep our focus limited to just these three guys here. Okay, and yeah, one more thing, in the view we have data binding. As we will see what the data binding is, it's a really important thing. So bindings, what is binding? Binding is pulling data from a table or an object and show it to the user. Okay, and the guys who already work in Delphi already know that traditionally we already have this mechanism in place, like we drop the data bound controls on the form, right? We drop a table component, we select the table, and we just need to set a property like what field we want to display, and we are done, right? So that was traditional way of binding. But if we have if you are following object-oriented programming, then we directly don't have those tables, because data may be coming from a web service or some REST services. So what we do actually here, we take that data, right? It may be in form of XML or whatever. We populate our model, right? For instance, say customer orders. Okay. Now there is no existing previously prior to older versions. There was no way we can directly display this data in the form. What we need to do is we will say that edit box.text it equals customer.name. That's how we used to display data, because there was no direct way of showing the data. With the new Delphi, we have this live binding. It means we can also bind the non-data aware objects like customer or any other class with the controls. The controls which are not actually data bound controls, for example normal edit button, normal level, those sort of things. So let me quickly show you the live binding. It's pretty big. Yeah, I've seen the experience, and I thought I should find a way to make it more visible to the user. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a new Delphi application. We're not going to do anything exciting here, but just want to show you what the data binding is. We'll do it quickly. And this is the tool palette from where we can drag controls and show it to the user. When I selected application, Delphi creates a new form for me, so we all know that thing. What I'm doing here now is dragging a label, and I'm putting an edit box. Okay, and what we actually want to do here is, for instance, if I change some text here, I want it to get reflected here. Consider this label is actually our data object, for instance, because what we all want to achieve is passing the data back and forth. Okay, so to do the live binding, we can simply right click and say bind visually. It shows two options, the bindable attributes. What I do is just drag and we are done. Let's see if it works. Run. And oops. Yeah, the thing with binding is we need to move the focus from the control, then only it awakes and reflects the changes, or we can press enter. So without writing a single line of code, we can update the other objects by simple dragging a line from one object to the other. So this was just for the binding. Let's go back to our presentation. Yeah, so what we have just seen is a live binding designer. It's pretty simple, it's just kid's job. And okay, the other thing is managed binding. Now, managed binding is a slightly different and bit complicated approach, and it's not as friendly as we have seen. It uses the source code to bind the controls or objects from say edit box to a label or maybe a customer object or something else. Okay, and as per the Delphi help or documentation, they are not recommending the managed binding. The reason is being it's complex. Okay, otherwise it works the same way as what we have seen in the designer stuff. Okay, now for the C++ guy or anyone who might have have got their hands dirty with C#, the managed word is bit misleading here. So let me just let it clarify. When you talk in terms of Delphi, managed means you are managing that particular binding. Okay, in C# and .NET world, managed means .NET assembly. So just don't get confused with that thing. Okay, and yeah, so in I'll be showing a demo. We have an example here of the example is of showing context. And in this particular example, the approach, like we have two approaches. One is the visual binding, the other is managed binding. And the approach I'll be using is the other one, the topper one. Okay, and just bear with me. We are going to make it as simple as possible. Okay, so yeah, let's again jump back to our Delphi. Let me close this one. We don't need this anymore. Okay, I already have a project, a demo project I have created to demonstrate this particular thing. Okay, and yeah, context. So let me first explain what this simple application is doing. This is our main form, or we can say triggering point, from where we'll be launching or some other screens. So when I click the context button, what it shows is a simple form and some of the context like a Jack and Jill, and something is hidden here. Oh, I think because of resolution, some of the buttons are not visible, so maybe I need to change the things. Okay, there is some elements on the right hand side. Let me just quickly fix it. Yes, so yeah, this time it looks better. It's the same thing, and okay, so what we have here is a simple grid where we show name of a contact, email, and date of birth. Okay, we don't have date of birth of Jack and Jill, so it's empty. And when I click on new, what we are doing is we are showing a button where user can capture information for a new contact. If you want to change the data, we simply select contact and click edit, and it will edit. So it's very simple application, and what our objective is to build this application with the managed framework that's available with Delphi. Now, after looking at this application, we can easily think of like what we need to create this sort of application. If you want to follow the object-oriented approach, of course you need to have a class that stores the information of a contact, and that class is going to be a very simple one. We'll have to have one property called the name, we'll have to have another property called email, and date of birth, right? And we need a mechanism, right, to pull those data from that object and show it to the user. Okay, so for this particular thing we need a view. That view will be having 3 fields, one to capture name, the other to capture email, and then date of birth. Okay, so let's first have to take a look at our context, the model class. As I mentioned, this is pretty simple, nothing surprising, nothing challenging here. It's a very simple contact class. Okay, and what you see here is it's derived from a class called base model. I'll explain what is the base model when we discuss the framework. Okay, but in this particular example, it's very simple class, nothing surprising, nothing here. Okay, very simple class. Okay. And now let's take a look at our view. So what we have here is a simple view with 3 fields. Okay, and again, if you go back and see like what the code we have, again nothing surprising. I just dropped 3 controls on the form and nothing much here. Okay, but still that application works fantastic. So there is one more thing we need to discuss before we move ahead, and that guy is view model. This is our middleman, and the job of this middleman is to pull data from the contact object and show it to the user. Okay, and if we are creating a new contact, then what the view model will do is create a new instance of the contact object, and it will do the wiring that is required to display that particular new object. If we are editing a contact, what it needs to do is to fetch the existing contact, pass it to the view so that view can display it. Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned we'll be using those challenging approach of managed binding, and I also mentioned that it's a bit complicated way, but if we take a look at this particular thing, I haven't had to do anything. The code we are seeing, that's the only code that makes it work. Let's take one more look. This is our contact class. The only requirement is it must be derived from T-base model. Okay, the rest of the thing is common, nothing surprising here. What we see here, update, is actually a helper method that just sets the internal or private member of contact. Okay, because we don't directly expose the field to the rest of the world, because that's against the oops. Okay, and our view. Our view is pretty simple, and there is one thing that's I have collapsed it here, is binding. So how this magic is working is because of these 3 or 4 lines of code, and what it is actually doing here is it is accepting a reference of a view model, the contact view model, and then it is wiring the things up. Wiring means binding the things, like view model dot bind. It says the view model that okay, I want to bind this particular edit box with the contact name. That's the only thing we are doing here. So by edt.name, that's the name of our component. We want to bind its text property with the contact name. So like the first line, we have second line for the email and third line for the date of birth. Okay, so only these 3 lines of code we need to write to make those things happen. Otherwise, the model is already plain object, like in Java they call it plain Java object or those kind of stuff, right? And view doesn't have anything. And surprisingly, if we are writing our view model, this guy also doesn't have to have anything. It just needs to derive it from the base object VM class. Okay, and I'm passing tContact as a parameter. It's a type. That's a type of our model. Again, we don't need to write any code for the view model, and it works. Things if we have seen managed example in Delphi, one of the any other blog or on the net, you'll be surprised that okay, managed binding is used to have a lot many code, but here in this particular example we don't need any of those code. We'll see how these things are working, because in technology or science there is no things like magic. Okay. Yeah, so now the magic part. The idea behind having this approach is, when I first looked at the MVVM, I really liked it, but the way it used to the approach was complicated, and it's not easy to implement, especially if we are designing an application. Nobody will bother to write those amount of code. It requires lots of code. Okay, so to make it more simplified and still make the best use of the managed binding, and I thought like, why can't we have something, a very simple framework that user can simply go there and just bind the stuff and it just works magically for them. So that's the main thing, that the framework is not so, we can say it's not so mature. It's just started. It's like a little baby, and it has just I just started it. And inside the framework, what it is actually doing is it has many wrappers around those managed binding, just to make the life easier for the Delphi programmer or whoever wants to implement the MVVM. And in most of the things, like I have said, like if we declare our view model, we don't have to write the code. So why it happens? Because if we take a deeper look, there is no actually way of pulling data from the object and showing it to the view model. Actually, it's not pulling any data, but still it works. So what works here is the reflection, right? And in a Delphi we call it advanced RTTI. What it does internally is it queries an existing object. It queries like what are the attributes it have, okay, and automatically pulls those information, and this MVVM framework extensively makes use of those reflection to make it magic. And of course there are certain limitations of this framework, like if you see other demos of the binding and MVVM, they allow flexibility to drag the things here. It looks pretty easy, but believe me, it works at the beginning level. If you are serious about developing some enterprise application or some of the commercial application, that's not the approach you'll be following, because if you drop just 20 to 50 components in the form and see how ugly it looks when you drag the lines, it can become nightmare. Of course there's ways to overcome this thing, like you can create multiple layers, but still. And we like all serious programmer, they like to have better control, and since that's why they call it managed binding. Okay, so if we have the things in our way, we feel it in better control. We know where the things are. And the other thing is so those sort of limitations are still there. The future idea is to extend this framework further, so that we can use it in a more complex application, like very big enterprise level applications where we require the messaging framework, right? Because if we have a complex model, it needs to pass information back, and there are also in a commercial application, it may also happen that one view model is referencing the other view model, right? So in those in those sort of scenario, we don't directly use the other model or other classes directly, because it again creates a coupling, okay, and we need to have some sort of messaging framework in place. So those sort of ideas are still in progress, and maybe there's a future for this particular framework. And yeah, I think before we move to this particular slide, we can have a quick look at our internal framework, which I was talking about. Yeah. Now let's add some more twist to this our contact application, and like if I want to add a simple rule, like if I type a name, say, currently what happens is user can click the OK button even if the name is not provided. So if I want to say add one rule, like if the name is say non-empty, then only user should be able to save it or click OK button. Okay, so let's implement that simple rule, and with this framework, see how easy it is. Yeah. So for this particular rule, we know that our model does not have any this kind of constraint, but in the application we want to put this constraint, or we want to put this limitation. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, like if we have some validation or logic, right, it should go to the view model. So I have already some code here which I commented. Let me uncomment this thing. What I'm doing here is I'm introducing a property called canSave, right? And we have a method that decides when user should be able to save. Okay. Yeah. So the implementation for this canSave is pretty simple. What we are checking actually here is we are just testing that, we are checking that if the name of the contact is empty, then return false, otherwise return true. So that's the only condition we are checking, and we are not doing anything extra. Once we are done with this thing, we just need to go back to our view, like here, and we need to bind this, because view will have to have some knowledge about what's going on. For the binding also, again, just one line, and that will be binding. What I'm telling here is bind my OK button with the canSave attribute. Okay. Now see, very interesting thing here. Earlier we have seen that our name, email address, it's coming from our model. Okay, and the binding was perfect. In this particular scenario, we have added one attribute to a view model. So one data is coming from model, validation is coming from view model. Still, the way of binding is same, and this complexity is again internally taken care by the framework, just to make the thing simpler. And it does not work. The reason is, as I mentioned, the binding framework needs to know that something is changed, and we need to press enter or change the focus. Okay. But in this particular example, we want to make things change immediately. And there's one more thing I'll need to do is, okay, we forget to do one thing, like that's this line. I'll explain what it is. Okay, we need to tell the system that okay, whenever a name changes, then our rule comes into effect, of course, right? So whenever name of a customer changes, that time our canSave attribute will also change, because canSave is driven by the name. If the name is empty, canSave will be false. Okay, so that's the thing that was missed here. And now let's go back to our view and run it again. Yeah. Okay. As you can see, as I start typing, the OK button becomes enabled. If I remove the text, it just grays out. And again, we don't have any code for this particular thing in our view. It is again totally isolated. One more important thing is, if we go back to our view, you'll be surprised that even in this view, I'm not even using the contact view model. Okay. In the constructor, a very generic instance of view model, what the framework provides, it's the only thing that's passed here. So no coupling again. Okay, it does not use dependency injection or any other kind of injection, but this bind method is provided by the framework itself. So, and all those magic is just that's a reflection actually. That's a power of reflection. And similarly, if we go back, I think that's it is. Okay. And there will be very rare chances where somebody just need to go there and look inside what the framework is doing. But still, I'll be publishing this source, so it can be accessible to all those Delphi community. Yeah, I think we are good with the demo here. We can go back. If you have any questions regarding the framework, someone want to know more about the MVVM, just please raise your hand. I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible. Okay, the actual flash of this pattern is inside what you see here as a framework. Okay, these are the guys. Okay, so let's move to the next slide.
I have one question. It's related to MVVM and observer pattern and MVC. So we know that we do have one design pattern like observer design pattern and one architectural pattern like MVC.
Okay, please use this. So the other can also, yeah.
Hello? Yeah. So we know that we do have one design pattern like observer design pattern and one another architectural pattern like MVC.
Mm-hmm.
So how MVVM is different to both of these?
Okay, yeah, this MV is common word. If you have seen other patterns like there is MVC or MVP. Okay, so this MV part is common whether it's MVC framework or MVP framework, but still I see some difference actually, because if you see MV or MVP or C framework, the view is still mixed with the logic, some sort of enabling, disabling, or launching the other screen from the same view. This concept is still very mixed. It's not very clear. Okay, but in terms of MVVM, right? If you compare MVVM with those patterns, then MVVM clearly states that okay, there should be no line of code, no logic should be there in the view. So that's a major difference. And the other thing is like if you take the example of say MVC, the controller is key participant, but again view will be having some mixed like view and some validation. The same thing is also true with the MVP pattern. Okay.
Okay, so you mean to say like controller is there in MVC that what is different than view model in this MVVM?
No, frankly speaking, you can still have a controller with your MVVM framework. If you have MVC framework in place, just go back and look at like what the view have. View will of course have some logic. Okay, you can still employ the MVVM there. Just abstract out the you already have a model, right? You already have a view. Okay, so just abstract out the logic from the view, and you can still have this MVVM pattern, and you can still have a controller. Okay, so as I mentioned initially also that it's not the only this thing. It's architectural patterns. So in architecture, in application architecture, you can have host of different patterns. You can have MVC, MVP, right? But if you are serious about isolating your validation logic from the view, then maybe MVVM is a candidate you can consider. Yeah.
And what about the observer design pattern? Because in observer can be treated as view model.
Look, the idea behind binding is observer actually. Okay. Because whenever you make a change, there is an observer that's keeping an eye like what's going on. Okay, and when it notices that something happened, and if it interest of that particular observer, it sends notifications. Okay, so the binding framework is built on the top of the observer pattern only. Okay, so you don't have to write actually any explicit code. But if want to use this MVVM for the earlier version of Delphi, then somebody will have to redesign the binding framework by hand, and they can use the observer pattern for doing that.
So you mean to say that this MVVM is developed using observer design pattern. Maybe inside the Delphi that we have seen the classes like data model related to data model, IVM model, all these classes.
The framework that I was talking about, it uses reflection. I don't need to use observer pattern because I'm utilizing the existing observer binding actually, and binding uses the observer. Okay, so that's the benefit I'm taking. Okay. Okay, so what's so good about MVVM? Yeah, as we have seen, like we don't have to write much code, and I have read one line from the Bill Gates. It says that good programmers are the laziest one. Okay, and they don't like to write a lot of code. They think a lot, write less. Okay, so what we have seen here is we don't need to actually write any line of code. Even if you employ this in your existing application, I'm sure you'll remove your lines of code. You don't have to write any new lines. Okay. So that's the one thing, clear separation of UI, and we know how that worked. Less coupled and high cohesive. Okay, this is something very interesting area, and if we are starting a application development from scratch, then it may not be of a big concern because every new code looks pretty clean, and but with the time and as it grows and it grows old, we all know that it becomes just a mess. Okay, and this is the real life. Every programmer, every experienced programmer knows. Okay, to avoid that particular thing, increased testability. This is like this connects with the earlier presentation which Tarun has done, like TDD. If we are concerned about TDD, then if we put our code in the view, then we all know that testing views is really very difficult. Either we'll need to do it manually, somebody will just need to run the application and do it manually, or they need to use some hacks like capturing the screen and writing those dirty scripts. Okay, so if we use this, our model it's already testable because it doesn't have anything that user needs to interact with. With the help of MVVM, our view model is also testable now. Okay, so that's the benefit, and what remains is just a pure user elements, and we don't need to test it. We can't test it actually. And low maintenance, of course. If there are less tangled things, of course the benefits are very clear. Okay. Criticism. Some of the criticism came from the John Grossman himself, like because he's the person behind this binding. So what he thinks, like if we use binding, there is a lot of extra overhead, right? Because the system takes care of most of the things for you, so it creates lots of the code behind. Okay, and for a very large application, things can really slow down. Okay, it requires lots of resources, and for my framework, this was another motivation. Like why can't we have some lighter framework that still works the way it still have the simplicity, and we can still utilize the power of bindings. So that was another concern. So yeah, that's one of the things. If we use visual binding, of course it's a resource hungry thing. Okay, and to have this sort of MVVM framework in a place, the initial effort required is quite a lot. Okay, if you use live binding, just drag and drop, we have seen it's pretty simple. But if we are considering employing this particular architectural pattern across the application, then it needs very serious thinking, like how or what are the existing forms we have, how those gets impacted, because every application has a new challenge. There is no rule of thumb. Okay, so believe me or not, even if try something different, you will have your own framework, right? Okay, so for MVVM, the initial effort is too big unless you have some sort of framework available that's doing the job for you. Yeah, the other drawback is it's really overkill for simple UI. The demo which you have seen, it's not a really good candidate for MVVM. Okay, it's simple overkill, so don't use it for this kind of application. But to demonstrate the idea, this was the best thing I can demonstrate, so I've just chosen that thing. But it's not for those kind of stuff. Okay. And yeah, because it's resource hungry, the memory consumption will be quite high. It can be quite high unless you have some sort of lightweight framework. And the binding, because you are not writing any code, you have no control to debug it. Okay, it uses reflection, and things are pretty complex when it comes to reflection. Okay, you can't directly go there, put a breakpoint, and see the value. Okay, it evaluates the expression at runtime, so debugging is a bit complicated. And that's it. Any questions?
So when you say it is difficult to decode,
Yeah.
When you say it is difficult to debug, then does this also imply that it's difficult to maintain?
Not actually, because you need to maintain the code which you are writing, and you are not writing the code. So
Not always.
yeah, that's true. Because here, as you have seen, the most of the things is working behind the scenes, and that's not the headache of the developer who is using the framework. Okay, but for instance, if you find a bug, for example, for some reason, say the name is not getting displayed. Okay, so it's very simple, trivial thing, but in a normal Delphi application, you can put a breakpoint, you can step in, right? You can step out. You can do lot many things. Right? You can put conditional breakpoints, lot many things. But here, you don't have anything actually. It's just using binding. You don't know what's happening inside. Okay. So unless you have complete idea, unless you completely understand the entire framework, it's really a bit difficult to debug and fix an issue. Yeah. But that's why it requires initial effort. That's the only reason initial effort has to be quite high, because it should be very easy for the end developer to implement this kind of framework. They don't have to learn anything. We just need to tell them that okay, if you're designing a new class, just derive it from here. If you're using a view, don't do it, just bind it, and things will work. But at the very root level, when it comes to taking a decision whether we want to go on with MVVM or not, that time we need to take care of this sort of things.
Hello. Yeah. So just looking at this, I'm just wondering if you have a complex view, which needs to get the data from multiple models.
Okay.
Do we need multiple view models, or can we derive the view model? Can we have one view model deriving from multiple models?
Can we derive? Of course, we can derive. And when we derive a thing, actually there is a relationship. If the new object which we want to derive is having the same set of attributes, and if you are adding something new on top of that, then of course we can go with the derive. Otherwise, if your view is made up of very complex things, like one data is coming from the customer, one is coming from the vendor, and you need to show all those stuff in a single screen. Okay, so those are all together different people, and in that particular case, yes, of course you can design a view model, because view model is a one-to-one mapping with the view. So if you have one view, you will have one view model, right? And this particular view can be a very complex one. Similarly, your view model for this corresponding view can have those references to other view models also. So it can compose other view models, okay, and expose it to the view. And in a real world application, those are the real candidate, right, for having this sort of implementation. Yeah. Any more? Cool. Thank you.